I'd like to thank our friends at Sardine for making today's episode possible. They have over 4,000 signals. From device, email intelligence, telco, and AML monitoring, the Fraud Squad is there to help you make the right decisions. They ship new features weekly to help the fight, and they are never afraid to jump right in there with you and make sure you have the rules and models you need. For everyone attending MRC this March, please be sure to visit them at booth 210 on the show floor and see what everyone is talking about. If you aren't going to MRC for some reason this year, be sure to check them out at these shows before the big one. It's good to have a fraud squad behind you, and with Sardine, you get the best fraud squad around. Please visit www.sardine.ai today to learn more. Let's get to the episode. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of your favorite fraud fighting show, Fraud Boxer. I have one of my favorite guests of all time back again. I got Shawn Kelley back. How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Yeah. So a lot has changed in your life since you were on my show a year and some change ago.
Yep.
And we're going to get into that a little bit there. I think it's some really, really, really cool stuff. But let's just catch up on how you're doing in life. And yeah. Where are you at these days?
Cool.
What are you doing for fun these days? What's the weather like? All those things.
This sounds good. I'm currently in the Pacific Northwest, just outside of Portland, Oregon. This has been my home base for a while now. Past year, though, I spent much of it in the Chicago area. I guess going back a little bit, I left SeatGeek in April of this past year and took a few months off. And during that time, and then the few months after, even when I wasn't taking the time off, I was renovating an old house there. That's been a long time kind of side thing. Years and years ago, I took a break from tech and actually did that as my career for a couple of years.
Some house flipping?
Just renovating old houses. Sometimes to resell, sometimes for my own, sometimes for others. And so this was one that was my own project. And so worked on that for a while, and then wrapped that up this end of fall. And now mostly back in the Portland area, a lot less traveling so far this year than I did last year. So back here, winter weather has not been great this year. So, I just got out cross country skiing a couple days ago. But there's not.
You didn't have to go very far for that this time, though, did you?
No, not at all. It's great. That's one of the best things about being out here. To do anything outdoors, you don't have to go far. So,
yeah. So I grew up outside of Portland too, and obviously, so about half my friends' base is still native Portland people.
Yep.
Yeah, I've seen the weather that you guys have been having the last couple of weeks, and that's when it hits up there, it hits hard. There's like
does,
no
and I'm
mercy.
right at the edge of the gorge, so I get east wind out of the gorge, and so when there's ice,
Are you over in like Troutdale?
On the Washington side, but yeah,
got it.
Yeah.
So, yes, let's talk about what's changed in your life.
Yeah.
And we'll just get right down to it. Like I think everybody in the industry knows you well enough. And so we don't need to go back through your history. Obviously, you were at SeatGeek for a long time.
Yep.
But you're very popular in the industry. You got a lot of friends in the industry. And you have been working on something for the last year.
Yep.
Outside of flipping a house, or not flipping a house, but building your own house in Chicago.
Yep.
Let's hear the story.
Yeah. So it goes back when I was at SeatGeek. One of the areas that I identified that I didn't love any of the existing solutions for was chargeback management. And there were a few reasons for that. And some of it was kind of service of existing companies. Some of it was the actual product of the existing companies. But also even philosophically, I didn't see any of the existing products out there as something that really felt like it could solve the problem of chargebacks. The amount that chargeback management costs companies is significant enough that these should be massive value adds to anybody that is taking on one of these vendors.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things like that I always thought about, because I've played with so many of these different tools and so many of these different toys, and then with outsourcing, with insourcing, how's it going to be? It seems like everybody, like lately, well, maybe not so lately, but before was like really trying to play like a numbers game. It was a quantity over the quality
Yep.
of the responses,
Yep.
and then how quick you could get them turned around. So it was like not even necessarily workflow, but more automation as far as just like send a generic response back as quick as possible. And that seems like what I would always do. And then the pricing was like it was aggressive for what the service provided,
Right.
if that makes sense. And a lot of times, if you really did the math, how much you were giving away versus how much you were recovering versus how much it would cost to spin up like staff
Yep.
was usually it didn't the economics didn't work out.
Right.
So yeah.
Right. And it's interesting because yeah, automation came onto the scene a few years ago. And there was one provider specifically that kind of came into the market and came from totally outside of the
Yeah.
fraud or payments world. It's they have kind of a cool story. But they came into it and were able to kind of have that out of the box approach. And we're like, why can't this be automated? And for a lot of reasons, it can be. And that's a really great idea, especially at scale, right? But then when you get into it, and as tech has now evolved, you look back at those responses and what that product was, and it hasn't really evolved. And, that's where looking at it, I'm like, there's got to be a way to provide a better service and kind of build that relationship with clients in a way that you feel like that service provider is truly the best in the industry and knows chargebacks inside and out. That's what you want, is really an ally on your side. Um, but then when you're looking at working with enterprise clients, it didn't feel like any of them were really listening to the client. Me as a merchant, didn't feel like any of them really heard me, and then
Yeah.
they weren't coming into it helping give me a solution that suited me as an enterprise merchant. It was like, nope, this is what works for everybody else. It'll work for you. And ticketing, as you know, is a very interesting niche, a big niche, but a very,
Yeah.
very nuanced industry. And there's so much to
Yeah. And the rules are
chargebacks.
like, yeah. And for people that don't know, like, that might be listening to this and you don't really spend your whole life doing chargebacks. Like ticketing is weird because usually the return policies are there is none. You can't get a refund, you can't return it, you can't exchange it.
Yep.
And a lot of brick and mortar traditional stores do have some sort of return exchange policy. There's some laws around that. And that a lot of the existing chargeback tools and the banking systems were meant to show that you offer them a refund, show that you exchange it, show that they canceled it, and they expect you to have that ability to do that, but you can't in ticketing. So,
Yeah.
like canceled merchandise, for example, is a great code that like people do that one in ticketing all the time, and then you have to like try to reply and say, "Well, show that it wasn't canceled." But
Yep.
a lot of times they don't just accept your no cancellations policy as a thing they want that you had a conversation with these people. And how do you prove that, when it's a blanket policy? So
Yep.
ticketing is always weird because the policies are rigid, no returns, there's no exchanges, there's nothing. You buy it, it's a moment in time and it's gone. And
Yep.
that is just not what traditional banks are used to, and then therefore traditional chargeback providers.
Yep.
So
Yeah, totally.
yeah.
And one of the things when we really started digging into this, realizing, looking at the responses that other merchants use, looking at the responses that other vendors use, none of them really felt like they were taking into account the differences in the different issuers and how they handle chargebacks and how they respond to them. And the fact that
Yeah.
there's a human in most cases on the other side of these making this decision, right? And so
Yep.
that human can very easily see, oh, this is a template, same as every other one. Oh, this is a merchant that's fighting every single chargeback, trying to say that they should win every one. Obviously, every merchant shouldn't win every chargeback. And that's where there's a
Yeah.
ton of difference in merchants, right? And a ton of industries that get a lot of fraud. And if you're fighting 100% of your fraud chargebacks, I understand the argument of there's plenty of friendly fraud in there, but that also varies merchant to merchant massively. I saw a reference to a study actually just yesterday mentioning that 70% of fraud chargebacks are actually not fraud. Well, I very much disagree with that based on the merchant, right? So there are some merchants that absolutely 70, 80% of their chargebacks come through as fraud aren't fraud. But
Yeah.
if you're looking at an industry like ticketing, for example, absolutely that is not the case. And there's nowhere near 70% of their fraud
Yeah.
that is
My
not actually.
my experience is more like usually in the businesses I work is probably about 30%
Mhm.
is, first party fraud.
Totally.
At the end of the day, 70%, I would say if 70% of your claims are fraud, but friendly fraud, you need to look at some of your processes you have in place as a merchant.
Yep.
What is your actual refund policy? What are you selling? What is the customer experience like if they're
Yep.
having problems? Like, you can say no refunds all day long and give people the middle finger, but you need to have at least a little bit of a robust system in place to have support
Yep.
if something does come up, because people will use all means necessary. Uh, I think that if we could, I know
Yeah.
it's not on our script, but if
All
we
right.
could, let's drill down into some of these merchant and issuer things. So I think it's a great point where you're like, I think people forget on our side, especially when we're, as we say, throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks in chargebacks. We forget that there is a human being that is deciding the outcome for you on the other side, and you have to, and that person's going to have emotions. So
Yep.
it very well is possible that you can have two identical cases side by side. You win one and you lose one because there is a human
Absolutely.
being that is
Yep.
deciding those.
Yep.
And I think it's important to understand that those people do, like, the Chase chargebacks go to Chase.
Yep.
Like, there's somebody that's getting a paycheck from Chase
Yep.
that is deciding your outcome. And the same thing with Discover, same thing with Wells Fargo. And I think for me, especially during COVID, when in ticketing, again, we keep going to ticketing,
Yep.
but the shutdown for us in ticketing was different than it was for any other style of merchant.
Mm-hmm.
We legally could not have these shows.
Yep.
The government would not allow us to have these shows. And that created Visa dictating policy for their issuers.
Yep.
That I don't think had really been seen before. Now, there was specific documents that came out. I think I was sharing them with everybody when I was getting them, but there were specific documents that came out that said, if Visa, if you're an issuer, if it's ticketing, these are the things that you have to follow. These are your chargeback rights. These are what it's going to be.
Yep.
And we would write back to those. Now, they were all different. Discover's, I think, was my favorite because, like, it was a lot of nuance in there, and, like, I leaned into it so heavily, which caused massive win rates.
Yep.
But massive second chargebacks. But I think that it was let's talk about that for a little bit. And, like, so when you see issuer by issuer, what kind of, like, fluctuations are you seeing? And, like, what are you guys doing? I mean, we should probably talk about your damn tool though, huh?
Yeah.
First, then we'll talk about issuers.
Either way. So just, I guess, quickly to back up a little bit, our approach is what I found to be very different than anybody else out there. And we built what I wanted and needed when I was on the merchant side 6 months ago.
So you built it for yourself instead of spending all your time and building something cool for someone that isn't going to be thankful for it.
Yes. Yeah, it's true. Totally. And so in doing that, it's coming in and first taking a very consultative, hands-on approach and working with an enterprise client to determine what are your struggles, what are your numbers right now, what are your metrics that you're trying to hit. Are you on chargeback programs? Is that where things need to focus first? And, a lot of companies talk about root cause analysis, and there's a ton of value in that on the chargeback side of it. But what's causing the chargebacks in the first place, and helping companies understand fraud prevention is very different than your recovery rate. Those are two different things, but both play heavily into your overall chargeback rate and what your overall win rate and recovery rate is against that. And so, and again, kind of going back to what we were talking about, that study that mentioned 70% of fraud chargebacks are not actually fraud. Sure, maybe for some merchants that's the case. For other merchants, that's nowhere near the case. And not taking an approach that treats every merchant the same, and really going in kind of merchant by merchant and crafting a solution that works for them. So there's that side of it. But then there's the other side, taking into account the issuers and their responses all being very different. And Amex handles chargebacks very different, obviously, because of the nature of their system, but also they're very, very pro-consumer typically, even more so when you get into higher dollar value items. And you see win rates typically drop significantly for merchants.
Interesting.
And so those kinds of things that you're taking into account, and no two responses should be the same across issuers, across chargebacks, looking at exactly what happened. And that's where kind of the rise then of AI came into play with this and played into the idea and philosophy here, where it's like, okay, the amount of data that I can ingest in crafting a response for any individual representment is a massive amount of data, right? And so if you think about ticketing, I can quickly instantly scour the web and find out, are there news articles where did something happen at this show? And that's what's causing this chargeback to be happening.
That's so good. Yeah. I used to get
what
that if I
what
have
are
like a really high rate.
what are what
Yeah,
are
I'd always
what
be
are
like, "Did
these
the show get
external
flooded?
factors?" Right.
Did Travis Scott murder somebody on stage?"
Yeah, no, and there was one case where I remember looking at months ago where it seemed like a pretty cut and dry, someone's trying to cheat the system. They aren't actually owed money back for this. They used the ticket. And then when you do that kind of like dig into it, it's like, oh, there was a stabbing 20 minutes into the show. They shut the show down. 20
Yeah.
minutes had been played by the performer. He wasn't going to give money back. And so the person's like, what the heck? That kind of thing that you would never know that. And it wasn't a huge show. So it wasn't, it wasn't top of mind for any ticketing company. But all of a sudden that plays into what the response should be, and maybe even how the company behind it wants to handle their response to it. So,
You know what? I'm just like the stabbing. You remember Summer Jam?
yes.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just like, I don't know what it was about that show, at MetLife every year, but something massive happens every single year at that show. And it's like the most charged back event every year. Like that you can just single event, just look at it. It's always going to be Summer Jam. Summer Jam's always going to ruin everybody's day.
It's a trend. Um,
Yeah.
I was just going to say, so really the idea, ultimately, tons of this process can be automated. And that's where you can make it scale. You can handle 30,000 chargebacks a month for some of these big companies only by automating. You can't staff enough people to respond to 30,000 chargebacks a month. You can, but nobody wants to, nobody should.
They're not going to be working here in the United States.
And so really looking at how can we really be smart about chargebacks and put effort into the ones that, sure, let's give them some more attention. Let's automate the ones that can and should be automated. Let's apply intelligence to the routing side at the very beginning and determine, should this bypass the chargeback process entirely and leverage one of the alert programs and, bypass that.
Oh, you guys are building that in too, huh?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And looking at, the goal is to really, on any chargeback, to look at it. Should this be fought? Yes or no? What likelihood are we to win it?
Oh.
Kind of weigh that into it. And is there a different way that this should be responded to? And kind of have all of that happening dynamically so that that as good as you can, the outcome, it's never going to be perfect because there's humans on the other side. But also you're not wasting the time of the issuers by pushing all of your BS chargebacks to them that you as a merchant know you shouldn't be fighting when you look at it, right? Plenty of gray area, plenty of actual fraud in fraud chargebacks, plenty of not actual fraud in fraud chargebacks. So it's, again, not applying a blanket approach, and it's really trying to be intelligent about the whole process.
So let's talk a little bit about fighting all or fighting some.
Yep.
Because there are some people that do. I've done a little bit of both before. Like I've had some automation that allowed me to fight all, but it's a double-edged sword because obviously issuers going to get pissy with you.
Yep.
If you're just fighting junk.
Yep.
But also if you happen to, that human that's deciding it happens to side with you on something that's absolute blatant fraud.
Yep.
You're going to get smeared on customer reputation.
Exactly.
And some businesses care about that more than others.
Yep.
But what are your opinions on like how you think people should approach what they fight? And like, obviously you touched a little bit on it there with you guys have built that intelligence and that decision making into the tool. Should I fight it? What are we likely to win? But tell me a little bit about like your philosophy that's behind that.
Yeah. So it's interesting thinking about it. I always try to think about it from the different stances, right? So if you're the customer and somebody stole your card and bought tickets on a ticketing platform, and just using ticketing because we have that in common, But
That's just what we do.
let's say that happens, and they're not always crazy purchases. It could be, a $220 purchase. So it's not the end of the world, but it's a decent amount of money. And so it's a fraud chargeback. And then that ticketing company fights it and says, no, this is not fraud. And they happen to win it. Screw that. Like, as a consumer, that sucks. And I have no desire to do business with that company again, especially if that's my intro to that company. Even more so if it's a company that I've trusted and I'm like, really, you're going to do this to me? And so looking at it again, from that company reputation side for the consumer, if you look at it from the company side, sure, it feels great. And you can get a little bit of, increase in win rates out of winning some of those fraud chargebacks. But you have to decide as a company, is that worth that approach? Is it worth those people that you are insulting? And where does that stand kind of philosophically with you as a company, right? And that's where I don't think me as a vendor am the one to make that decision for the company, but I want to enable that company that they can choose to fight everything or not choose to fight everything. Whereas most of the other tools out there, it's one or the other. Typically it's a fight everything approach because that's certainly the easier way to go. But I want to enable
they look so
that.
much at like dollars recovered versus like necessarily like actual win rate. They're like, we've recovered like $30,000 for you in the last month versus like, okay, like then how much came back as a second? Where are we going out pre-arbitrations here? Like how much is that costing? Just people don't know, but sometimes if you choose to fight that, there's like a $500 fee that comes with some of those things.
If it goes that far, And I mean, the second chargeback is an interesting thing because when you dig into a lot of the billing processes for the others in the industry, you'll find that they base it off of that initial win rate, right? And not off of the ultimate win rate. And so you're paying.
Are you guys doing ultimate win rate?
We're doing ultimate win rate in the cases where it's success-based pricing. But especially for enterprise companies, I don't think success-based pricing is always the way to go. So, again, it's that idea of let's look at what's important. And in a lot of cases, we're finding with enterprise companies, they need some consistency and predictability around what their pricing is going to be. And not this,
they got forecasting to do.
5 months later, adjustment being made to January's invoice, and the accounting team hating the whole chargeback process because it's such a mess. And so, kind of weighing that, and again, helping achieve what are the goals that you want to set out to achieve, and I've seen it on both sides of that.
So, one of the things, like I keep going back to, I've told this story a bunch of times, is one of the things that helped me in my chargeback life the most was I went on site to an issuer, and that issuer was American Express. So it's the issuer acquirer, it's the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we took very specific examples of packets that we had sent and said, why did we lose this? Because this is all the responses that we thought were perfect. What's going on here?
Yeah.
And we sat with them for hours, and we flew out to Phoenix to do this. And we sat with them for hours and went document by document by document to say, this is needed, this isn't needed, this does this shouldn't say this, and really hone in on the things that like really matter.
Yep.
And it was, to this day, one of the most valuable things that I've ever done as far as understanding what the issuer's view is on disputes on their side, because they obviously have government regulations they have to follow, but also customer obligations, because if you got a Chase Sapphire customer, he's probably spending a couple of bucks a year on that card.
Yep.
You don't want him to go away and go to American Express, vice versa, So there's a balance that they have to strike between making sure that like Visa's going to be happy because merchants like me are paying the fees to them, so we want to take their cards, but also by keeping the consumer spend out.
Yep.
There is like, I think that's people always have to understand balance in all parts of life. You can't drink too much, you can't drink too little, There has to be balance on everything, So what are some of your thoughts around that? I know we had kind of touched on that before we backed up again there.
So that's one of the most interesting things to me. And the analysis that you can do on an issuer by issuer basis gives you as close to, yes, ideal would be go to every issuer and spend a week with them and go through one by one. And doing that, you can get close, but there's still those humans at every every
Yeah.
issuer that are reviewing these, and their biases against any industry
It,
or any company or toward consumers.
any
Like,
brand. That's what I'm always like, what if they see, because we had our logo on
mhm,
there. And I'm like, what if like he had a bad experience at Summer Jam and now he's has to decide case outcomes and he's just like, no, because I
yeah,
hate that company,
yep, yeah, no, totally,
Like
and that's
there has to be some of that.
without a doubt. And even when you work alongside anybody working in kind of that agent role where they have to make decisions and they're graded on their numbers that they're putting through every hour. Sometimes it's like, oh crap, I'm behind, ab, yes, no, yeah, like they're quickly picking. And so are we presenting in our representment to them it's so clearly laid out that they know exactly what's going on, or are we giving them so much information that they're like, yeah, screw this, no,
Yeah.
person's getting their money back.
That's why, like, if you got like 17 pages going across, like they're not gonna sit there and read 17 pages. Like I always, my whole thing, and you're the expert now, is like I try to make it so the guy could make. Oh, so I'm sorry, I'm assuming gender. That the person could make their decision in 15 seconds or less
Yeah,
when opening my packet.
yeah,
Like I wanted all the information just be right there.
yeah,
Off you go,
yeah, yeah,
and that I've tried to make their life easier. Is almost is like the dangling a virtual cookie in front of their faces. Here you go,
yeah.
take this and
And
go.
and that's where
Um,
there's variance too between issuers. In some, there's better win rates with longer packets with more evidence there, and others where it's very succinct. Here's the very relevant evidence. You can get what you need. And
Yeah,
so,
I would like if we had like $100,000 Super Bowl tickets, those are the ones that I would be like, okay, maybe the 17,000 pages need to happen on this one.
sure. But even there,
But I mean, but at the
you
same
want it to be
time,
relevant and give them a map through that. Like what do they need to
yeah, it needs
see?
to be why should I still have this $100,000
Yeah.
on this? And those
Yeah.
ones, like you need to have like that. That's why I'm like, people got to spend a lot of time, put some screenshots in. They put it up on their social media. They were there. Here's the photo of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, for $30 tickets, it gets to be a little different.
Yeah. But that's where you can leverage machine learning and then AI in the generation of what the response is around, even for a $30 one, you can present what should be the most compelling evidence is a tricky term to use in the middle of
Yeah.
talking about chargebacks, but ultimately that's the term for a reason, right? And how do we present the most compelling evidence to that reviewer for why we should win this? Um,
Did you
and
guys build in some compelling evidence 3.0 stuff for us?
yes,
Because that's
that's
tricky to navigate
it.
for
It
almost
is.
everybody.
And again, it's interesting because even as I think it's moving in the right direction, but there aren't very many merchants out there that it's made any like real big difference for yet.
Yeah, it's all single digit ups or downs. I've noticed when I've seen some of the stats on that, and like
Yeah,
I've seen it like across like 6 or 7 different industries. Like they broke it down by that, and like what was it? Food delivery, it's been pretty good but for like service industry, it's been a negative.
yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah. And
and I
there's
think that's totally fair because like how often are you having your windows done? Like
yep,
so you can't go back 3 years or whatever, like what is it? Greater than 120 days, but what is it? Less than 365? I can't remember. Yeah, something in there.
yeah,
Numbers in there.
yeah.
But yeah.
So
So what's your company name?
we are disputed.ai. Disputed Inc. Is the company website. Disputed.ai. Yeah.
How many of you are there now?
So myself and a co-founder, his name's Andrew. He's the technical side, and I'm the operations side. And then we have an engineering manager and 3 engineers working for us, and a team of 5 agents that are helping make it all work.
Helping with the disputes and the white glove service.
Yep, exactly. And on the agent side, it's taking that approach of most of this can be automated and leverage humans where it makes sense, but you can't scale just by adding more and more humans to it. Not to the levels that it would have to be scaled to actually be effective. So let's
Yeah.
be
So you
smart.
just came out of stealth like about a week ago.
Yep.
This is going to come out in like 5 days from recording
Yep.
time here. So, yeah, how's it been? How, like, what's happened since then? Because I looked at your post and you had about 3,000 likes on there.
Response has been incredible. It's been encouraging because so many people, neither Andrew or I had really let anybody know what we've been working on and that we've been working together. We had known each other as colleagues at SeatGeek, was our common point. Prior to that, he had been working for a ticketing startup that was his own company. And prior to that, he was an engineer at NASA. And so he
No,
has a strong
just
pedigree.
NASA.
We both know a ton of people, but nobody, we hadn't made it public or made it known really what we were working on. And so last week we called it Operation Come Out of the Shadows. And it was, here we are. This is what we're working on. And it's, we've built it. It's been tested. We've got clients. It's time to actually like go and sell this and
Start selling.
and get more clients. And so that was last week, and it's been lots of meetings since then. Lots of, kind of back and forth, getting connected with different people, getting connected, getting introed. And yeah, it's been exciting. And a very different,
Yeah.
kind of change of pace rather than focusing on the few clients as we were building. And now it's like, all right, it's go time. And so moving into sales mode, and I'm learning sales, learning coaching, for that.
Yeah.
And
Do you like sales?
I love people. I love talking to people. The part that I struggle with is kind of that initial outreach. And, I
Yeah.
can make a list of 100 companies that I want to talk to. And then I, kind of freeze of like, but then one of the things that I try to help myself think and battle that with is like, if I were in their shoes, I would want to talk to somebody like myself who had been on the other side and had built a solution for this.
Yeah.
And so rather than thinking that, it's easy for me anyway to fall into this, like, who am I? What, but it's like, no, we literally built the tool that I wanted when I was a merchant. And so that conversation,
So
once I get into it, is easy.
yeah, and that's what I think is I hate doing sales. And with the podcast, I obviously have to send out stuff for sponsorships and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been fortunate. Um, a couple have come to me, so I haven't had to do that. Which I'm like, thank you when they come to me.
Yeah.
I think for me, like, I'm a lot better in, and I bet you are too. Is like just talking about it, like just talking about what we've built.
Yeah.
Is a lot better than like that first initial getting the interest. When the
Yeah.
interest is already there, I'm good all day long. But
Yeah.
it's just like that first part, and then I feel slimy.
Yeah.
I guess is like usually my thing.
Yeah.
And I just don't like that. But
Yeah.
I think that you're totally right on with you being a merchant is different because there are a lot of chargeback dispute startups right now,
Mhm.
and almost all of them, if you go back, they're all not from merchants.
Yep. Yep.
They're all like consultants or from cybersecurity world, and then they found an opportunity here. And there's nothing wrong with
Yep.
them. Like, don't get me
No,
wrong,
not at
because I
all.
know some people have been on my show that have done that. But I will say, for me, talking to you about your product, and I've had conversations about it offline, it gives me a lot more comfort because, like, my pain points,
Yep.
my struggles, and you and I you've never once asked me what my win rate is. You only asked me about volumes and like how I respond to things and those sorts of things, which shows that like you're not focused on the outcome. You're focused on the underlying structure of
Yep.
what I'm dealing with at this company.
Yep.
And I think that that's such a different approach than, oh, we could make you win, 83% of your chargebacks. I'm like, okay, like what am I winning right now? You don't even know that. Like, what if I'm winning 96%? That's a loss.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, no, and that's
so,
where there's such a
yeah.
difference between, from merchant to merchant, industry to industry, and even what each merchant is going through. That fraud prevention piece plays a big role there, like we mentioned. Win rate, recovery rate, all that is incredibly important, and those are the metrics that we look at and will work with the merchant on. But at the end of the day, a term that I have been kind of drawn to, that somebody introduced me to, was hair on fire problems, right? Where if you're a company that is dealing and you're on chargeback programs and your hair is on fire, you'll do whatever it takes in that moment to solve this.
I bet
And
you I know who told you that.
and that's where, that's one place. But then you have other companies that are like, yeah, my chargebacks are fine. It's not something that I'm worried about. I don't love the solution that we have, but I don't have a problem with it. Right. And
Yeah, I think like it comes heavily onto not just what you sell. Like, we would talk about ticketing and stuff all the time. And I think that, but ticketing is a great example because like it's not, we don't own that inventory.
yeah.
That's somebody else's stuff.
Yep.
And if I was manufacturing something, I would probably care a little less about my chargebacks because my cost is low. But when it's a ticket, if it's sold for $100, I got to give $100 to a promoter.
Yep. Yep.
Like, so that's not my, I don't own an inventory, but if I have like a t-shirt that I sold for $20, it might've cost me $1.20 to make that shirt.
Yep.
So it's not a huge deal. So I don't want to spend $5 to try and recover that.
Yeah.
When if it's a ticket, I got to spend that $5 because I got to at least get 95 back to give somebody,
Yep.
you know?
Yep.
So
yeah. And that's where,
yeah.
Really understanding each merchant. And there are some merchants that the recovery rate is the North Star. That's what everything needs to be focused on. Cool. Like, let's do that. Let's build an approach for you that's the North Star and everything focuses and builds that. There's a subscription box that I've talked to and they don't care about recovery rate because they just want to know that that person's not going to keep getting boxes after they've filed a chargeback, right? Like it's treated as an unsubscribe essentially. And so it's a very different approach in working with them because their metrics and what they're focused on is totally different.
Yeah, that's what the people just really jump to that. It is the unsubscribe button. And I think, I know it's not the idea for most subscription services, but because the idea is you want to keep people in there and they forget about it and they keep the service going. That's just margin. It's just the rules. And if chargebacks really become a problem, subscription people that are listening to this, make it a little easier to find the cancel button.
Yep.
Don't require like California has done the thing where like if you sign up online, you have to be able to cancel online. I would say the vast majority of people violate that. But I did an exercise. This is probably 10 years ago now, where like there was a merchant, and they specialize in selling subscriptions for third parties. So like it was magazines. So you would go on their website. It was like one of those daily deals type sites, but you could get like a magazine subscription for like $9 for a year, And they were getting a ton of chargebacks on these magazines specifically. And I was like, the first thing they asked me, they're like, what do we do about this? How do we win these? And I was like, well, are you even shipping magazines to people? And they're like, oh, we never thought about that. It turns out they weren't. Like the subscriptions weren't being sent to be fulfilled.
Yeah.
And they were just charging the people. But it's like one of those things where it's like, you have to find the underlying thing. But the same thing with subscriptions, if you make it easy to cancel, I won't have to do a chargebacks to cancel my box or something, And I have a couple. I do a golf box, which is a lot of fun. But I will say the quality of the products they've been sending me are not as good as they used to be.
Yeah.
So,
but that's also where
I did do a thing where I was keep going. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say that's where you can, as a service provider, we can play that consultative role with the client to figure out what are some of those ways that we can get the chargeback rate down and help you retain some of those customers.
So you're doing more, you're not just doing here just by chargebacks. Like you're being like, you can help them end to end with like their business overall as far as like, it relates to chargebacks.
Ultimately, yeah, that's absolutely the goal of, being able to take what is your program? What are your metrics that you're driving toward? How do chargebacks play into that? And how can we get you better numbers and get you into a better place? And figuring out
that's
what
cool
those
because I
metrics
feel like
are.
So many providers just are like, give us a chargebacks and we'll win them.
Yep.
Like that's where it stops,
Yep.
So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Because I mean, doing that, and there's going to be companies that are like, they don't want to take your suggestions. There's always going to be that. But, if you're in the program merchant on your chargebacks, you should probably listen to other people just a little bit.
Totally. Yeah, there's so many layers to it. And that's what's pretty exciting. And again, why it felt like there is a strong need for a company like this that isn't just a one size fits all approach. We're not for now focusing on small business. Where we started enterprise, that was mine and Andrew's background. And so we built from the beginning to be able to start with the enterprise into things.
And I think like, plus you got to pay the bills and enterprise merchants pay the bills. Let's be serious. So you need volume.
Yep.
But I mean, the fact that you're able to stress test from the beginning with enterprise level is pretty cool. That like, if like, that's the thing is like when you get that first enterprise client, if you can like really show value, like the other enterprise client, if you build it, they will come, like
Yeah.
that's where it is at
Yeah.
the end of the day.
Yeah.
So tell me what else should we know about it as we start to wrap up here?
I mean, I think one of the most exciting things is that it gets more intelligent over time as we get more and more data from more and more merchants. And that's one of the coolest things is not only does each client of ours benefit from that, but future clients do as well. And that's where eventually, we can then address and work with smaller clients because we have the tools and the data from the big clients that make it easy to help small clients.
So you can do like as issuers start to change their behavior too, like your tool will change with it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where it's interesting because on the fraud side, and I know we've talked about this at length in the past, where rules-based has a place, but not where it used to, right? And that's where
It's
ML is great,
legacy.
but there's also a little bit of a layer that rules help kind of guide ML as there's new emerging trends.
We have guardrails, business logic, and that's about it for rules now.
Yeah.
Because everything else is like it has to be like if transaction from the Philippines with a Japan shipping address. Okay, that's fine. It happens.
Yeah.
But then, now it's happened 5 times in the last 15 minutes. Like nobody's going to really see that in a rules-based system, but the new ML stuff will.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we can put like this whole country's blog. Yeah. I mean, there's just, and if you're still using just only rules-based folks, you probably need to call Shawn because you probably got a lot of disputes.
It's true. But, even to apply that here, if an issuer starts going to a more automated approach to handling their chargebacks and handling their reviews of the representments, at what point do you as a service provider catch on to that to be able to adapt and craft better representments to get a better win rate with that, with that issuer? So that's where, again, there's so much happening and so much changing so quickly, new rules that come out every year. And how do you adapt to that without having to rebuild everything?
Because that's what people that do it by hand, like they have to have their people learn all the rules. It would be nice if like we could just offload that to you and you take care of that. And then especially because like I like the idea of not fighting everything because like, let's say compelling evidence 3.0 comes along like it did.
Mm-hmm.
And like if you have that visibility into like the history through just like an integration, like you would just know what to do the very next transaction that comes in versus having to train the people, then go back through and look at the history, redo your rules and your logic if you're using those on disputes like some companies do.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I like the idea of that. I think that disputes just, they got harder and then they just got more involved.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yep.
They got more involved over the last few years and money's on the line. There's a lot on the line with that, but they got more involved and it takes more time and it's just more frustration. It's a lot of frustration when you take the time to do it and then you don't win.
Yeah.
Like that's just frustrating.
Yep.
So it'd be nice if I could have you guys tell me if I'm going to win or not. And then you guys just do the work.
That's what we're here for.
So how do we get a hold of you? Where do we find you? How do we learn more?
You can email me directly. It's Shawn, SHAWN @disputed.ai. Visit our website. There's a form on there. Find me on LinkedIn. Shawn Kelley.
Yeah.
And
With an E.
With an E. Kelley with an E. Yes. So.
Like I put no on the notes on there.
Yeah. Yeah. I will not change it. Yes.
That was good.
So.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, I'll put all the notes in about you guys in the description to this episode, so everybody will be able to find it nice and easy. I'll put links to your email address in there. If that ever changes, because the episode will be forever. If you start getting blown up too much, just shoot me an email and let me know. Hey, can you hide that and put my new sales guy on there?
No,
change it to sales at.
Yeah, no, not a problem. And honestly, even if you're a merchant and you don't have a problem with chargebacks or are happy with your solution, I would love to talk to you and learn how you're handling things. If you disagree with some of the things that we talked about today, also happy to have those conversations and learn from you.
Yeah.
So I'm
I think because a lot of people are going to be in their ways and it's worked for them for a long time. And I think that's a super valid point. Like they might have some knowledge about their specific industry that might be super helpful to you. So
totally.
Yeah. Even if you disagree with us, everybody, which we don't claim to be gods and know everything there is to know.
No, it's
Let
true.
us know so we can make the things better.
And it's as we get ahead, everybody gets ahead, right? It's a rising tide lifts all boats, not, we're not taking anything away from anyone else. If we can help you as a merchant, if you can help us with information, like you were saying about your industry, that will help other merchants in that industry, it's only going to help you as well. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on my show
Absolutely.
again. Always a pleasure to talk to
Yeah,
you.
no, my pleasure. It was great.
I can't wait. I'm hopefully going to see you at some of the conferences here.
Yep.
Hopefully. So, yeah.
Yeah, and hopefully,
If you get a booth or something, let me know, and I'll make sure that I share that too for everybody, so they know where to find you too.
cool. Sounds great. Awesome.
All right, everybody.
Thanks, Jordan.
See you in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening to the show today. Again, I want to thank Sardine for being this episode's sponsor. Be sure to visit them at booth 210 at the MRC and learn all about them from the fraud squad themselves. From KYC, onboarding fraud, and payment fraud, with over 4,000 signals like device, email, and telco to AML monitoring, they ship new features every week and are exactly who you need in your ongoing fight against fraud. Like I said at the top of the show, you're not buying one of the best fraud tools in the market, but the whole fraud squad behind it. Please visit www.sardine.ai to learn more. Thanks again for listening.